Hello everyone and welcome back to another album review. In this video I'm going to review Eternal Stalker by Merzbow and Lawrence Inglis. These are two artists that I'm pretty familiar with their works, and those two have worked in the past and they've made some pretty decent releases in my opinion. Actually I would say that we get some of the more refreshing era of some of the newer stuff of Merzbow. Lawrence Inglis seems to be a pretty intriguing music producer. He has the label Room 40, in which we see some of the more interesting newer releases of Merzbow, the ones that feel the most sonically powerful in his new era. And this new album is on DAIS Records, another label which is known for its quality when it comes to production. And Merzbow had released another album on DAIS Records with Hexa, which was a duo containing Lawrence Inglis and Jamie Stewart, which was a pretty refreshing release when it comes to a combination of dark ambient and noise music, and it was done in a pretty interesting way. So with all that being said, I obviously had some high expectations about this release, knowing that those two can do some pretty cool stuff together. So I really don't know what happened with this particular release, because this has to be for me the most underwhelming and the most disappointing thing I have ever heard from both of those artists. It's actually to a point where it is kinda bewildering. Now this is another release that borders in between dark ambient and noise music, and you have a few progressions with some of the patterns as it goes from one phase to the next, with some seamless transitions as it progresses from one phase to the next. The thing is though that this as a whole thing basically feels like background noise with nothing of substance and nothing on value. I mean, this is such a monotone release, just being the exact same tone in terms of mood and atmosphere, and just going on, and the only thing that you have is some occasions where it would become a bit more distorted, and that's basically it. There is nothing else about this release really. I mean, there are a few occasions where it feels like you have some elements of field recordings, but I don't really believe that they put that much to the table in order to make them seem kinda apparent. For the most part, it's just this background noise and this dark ambience that just keeps going and just having those few occasions with a few more distorted parts, where we can also have a few alterations as it comes to some of the Merzbow parts with some more industrial soundscapes, but again, those portions don't seem to be that much well realized. So what I'm basically left with over here is a pretty monotone album that just goes for the same thing over and over again, with progressions that don't really feel that they have that much of a value to them. It takes so long in order to get it to a certain point where you would feel like something is really happening over here. But even when we get into sections like this where it becomes more noisy and somewhat more intense, even those sections end up feeling quite lackluster, as I ended up feeling that there could have been more into those sections. Like the track The Long Dream, the introduction, doesn't really change that much into its 4-minute runtime. It's almost the same thing. You only have a bit of a progression towards something more intense when it comes to the end, which transitions to the track A Gate of Light. Don't get me wrong, I believe that those tracks in terms of production, they have some interesting elements. You can sense some quite nice sonic patterns and that there was a bit of an effort to them, but I believe that it was all for nothing, as nothing over here manages to really evoke any emotion. You can still say that this is a pretty dark and somewhat haunting and disturbing release in the way you have this atmosphere and this dark ambience, but it all feels just so flat and it never extends beyond this point. Like the track A Gate of Light feels like such an underwhelming attempt on blending noise with dark ambient. It's just a really boring and uninteresting theme with nothing really going on to it. The track The Visit just goes back to those dark ambient elements, and it's not really all that much different compared to what the track The Long Dream did. I would say it's even more lackluster, as some of the field recording elements seem to kinda evaporate on the track The Visit, so it's an even lengthier track that has even less going on to it. I'd say the progression towards the track Magnetic Traps is definitely one of the most standout moments over here, as we're talking about one of the noisier and more intense moments over here. Still, as a noise track, considering how many great stuff we've heard from both Merzbow and Lawrence Inglis, this feels kinda underwhelming. It is somewhat lackluster, and I also don't really really get this abrupt ending 1 minute before the song ends, with the rest of the 1 minute being almost complete silent. The Golden Sphere seems to be one of the most okay moments sonically, as this track seems to have a little bit of a more focus when it comes to the field recording portions and a somewhat industrial aesthetic, which I believe that in some occasions, sonically at least, it's handled pretty nicely, but still there's not really that much to this whole song in order to justify its 6.5 minute length. This then leads to a much more lackluster continuation with the track Black Thicket, which for me it's another one of those dark ambient moments that seems to go absolutely nowhere. But then finally we have what I would say is the most intriguing moment in the album with the track I Think Just Silence. This is by far the most intense moment over here, and I actually like the inclusion of some of the more industrial elements. It is the closest thing we get on this album on creating this dark and haunting atmosphere behind it. There seems to be a bit more to this track structurally. Unfortunately, this is another segment that doesn't really last that long into the song. Halfway towards it, we get back into this more dark ambient mood that doesn't really change that much in comparison to what the album did previously, and you have this long fade out which just feels really long and kinda unnecessary. So yeah, kinda bewildered with the results out of this album. I definitely wasn't expecting this, and I have heard multiple releases out of Merzbow that I find them to be mediocre and not really liking them that much. But this has to be the worst thing that I've heard out of Merzbow so far. Like, out of everything I've heard of him, I don't know, I couldn't really get into this release at all. It is one of my least favorite approaches when it comes to dark ambient noise, just having this one monotone continuous pattern that doesn't really seem to lead anywhere. Like, at this point it doesn't really seem all that different in comparison to what you would hear in your average really boring harsh noise wall release. It's not an album that necessarily feels poorly done, but it kinda feels like low effort. I expected much more out of those artists. This seems somewhat lazy, kinda playing it safe, and this was definitely not the direction that I was expecting from two artists that have already proven that they can do some pretty cool works in the past. So yeah, that was a severely disappointing album in my opinion. I'm gonna give Eternal Stalker a 3- out of 10. What's your opinion on this album? Like it, dislike it, why, and what do you want me to review next time? Let me know down in the comments. Leave a like if you enjoyed the video, subscribe for more content like this. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video. Goodbye.